Hello, everyone. This is Dana Taylor with National PTA. We are excited to be here with you all again. This is the fourth and last webinar in our four-part webinar series on food insecurity. And our last topic here is a very important one, and that advocacy is one of the things that National PTA does best. And we have a great team that handles our advocacy work here at National PTA. So once again, for the hopefully not last time, but thank you for devoting your time to us this evening. So again, I'm going to go through the GoToWebinar instructions with you all, just so you know. GoToWebinar is a platform we are using, and we primarily use the questions box to communicate with you all, those of y'all that are on our webinar this evening. And you also should know that we cannot see or hear you. We're going to be sharing our screen with you, which comprises the PowerPoint slide presentation that we have prepared for you all. We would like for you to communicate with us through the questions box. And at the end of the webinar, we'll get to all of the questions that you all have asked. As I introduce myself, please feel free to tell us who you are, where you are from, and what PTA you represent, again, using the questions box. So my name is Dana Taylor, as I mentioned. I'm going to be monitoring the webinar and helping review the responses and/or questions that we receive. I'm a programs and partnership manager here at National PTA, and I work with the most awesomest team in the world. At the end of the webinar, I'm going to be sharing some important information with you regarding some of the opportunities that we have available for PTAs across the country. In addition, the last thing that I want to mention is that you're going to be receiving a follow-up email after the webinar that's going to consist of the webinar recording and also a brief webinar satisfaction survey. And we hope to get those materials out to you by the end of next week. Please also know that the webinar is going to be available on National PTA's website in the coming week as well. And I think that is it. I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over to Stephanie. Stephanie's our subject matter expert and health educator, and we love working with her here at National PTA. So thanks everyone, and I'll be talking to you again at the end of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Dana. I'm really excited to be a part of this webinar series. Thank you for having me. As Dana mentioned, I am a consultant with National PTA on a variety of their healthy lifestyles initiatives. And I have a consulting business focused on public health and nutrition. So our two speakers today, we're thrilled to have them present with us, are Jackie Ball, our Director of Government Affairs at National PTA, as well as Alex Knock, a principal at Penn Hill Group. And they're going to be walking through all of the ways that National PTA is involved in advocacy work in this field of food insecurity and child nutrition, and how you can be a part of that as well. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Jackie and Alex.
Great, thank you, Stephanie and Dana, for the opportunity to speak with you all tonight and for all of you joining on this Thursday evening. So again, as Stephanie said, I'm Jackie Ball, Director of Government Affairs at National PTA. As you can see here, National PTA has really a long history of leadership and advocacy in child nutrition. We were at the forefront of our association, really helping to make sure that students had access to school meals in school, helping to make sure there was the equipment to be able to provide meals at schools for kids. We were active in the 40s for the passage of the National School Lunch Act, as well as moving forward the next iteration in the 1960s of the Child Nutrition Act. And really since that time, 70s and beyond, we've really continued to fight to make sure that child nutrition programs across the board, federal child nutrition programs have high nutritional standards. And the most recent piece of legislation that you may be familiar with was the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, which was adopted in 2010, which National PTA strongly supported and continues to advocate for those high standards in spite of attempts to roll back some of those standards. Next slide, please. So in this Congress, and there's been a lot going on this year and this Congress, as you all are well aware. And these are just three bills that National PTA has endorsed related to child nutrition. several, even like we know that there are unfortunately instances of lunch shaming where children are stigmatized who are unable to pay for their meals, and that is something we are strongly against. And so we've supported legislation both in the House and Senate to prohibit that practice, as well as we know that that school mealtime in schools can be really limited. It can be sometimes like 20 minutes, and that's not even including the time that students are able to, includes the time that students access their meals, right? They can spend several minutes, even more, waiting in line to get their food. And so one piece of legislation that we've also supported is the Healthy Mealtime Act, to conduct a study to see what are the best practices in terms of time and ways in which students can get their meals and eat them and actually you know, absorb the nutritious meals, right? Like you need time to actually, after you've eaten, to really to be able to absorb those nutrients as well. And then last but not least is the School Foods Modernization Act. And this is a bill that has been around for many years, that it provides resources, grants to school districts and food service administrators to make sure that they have the most up-to-date equipment so that they can prepare and deliver nutritious, wholesome, and delicious meals that kids will eat and enjoy. We know that many kitchens, school kitchens, are very outdated, and it's very important that that school districts and schools have the facilities to be able to provide nutritious meals. And that is going to be even more important as some schools are able to physically reopen in the fall, and there's going to be new school meal protocols for meals at schools. I know Alex is going to talk a little bit about this in a bit, but we were excited to see recently that there was $35 million allocated in a House appropriations bill for school food modernization for this equipment. So we're very excited about that. Next slide, please. So prior, there was a lot of talk early on in the 116th Congress that there may be an attempt to reauthorize the Child Nutrition Act. I think, in light of the current pandemic, that's probably on hold for now. But National PTA really would like to see a reauthorization of the Child Nutrition Act, but making sure that the nutrition standards that were in the 2010 Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act are maintained, if not improved and increased. But we want to make sure that any standards are aligned with dietary guidelines for Americans. We also want to make sure that students have access to federal nutrition programs. We want to make sure that there are not high barriers or bars to entry for school meal programs, especially for those students who need it the most. And as I'd already talked about, we definitely are advocating to make sure that schools have the resources they need to be able to provide nutritious meals. Another area that we've worked on, just to touch on, there has been attempts to roll back some of the nutrition standards in the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, particularly around sodium and whole grains. And National PTA has submitted comments against those rollbacks, as well as other attempts to increase the bar of entry for child nutrition programs. Next slide, please. And actually, at this point, I will be turning it over to my friend and colleague, Alex Knock from the Penn Hill Group, to give you a little more in-depth on what's really been happening since COVID has shut down schools and has impacted school nutrition and child nutrition programs and meals.
Hey, thanks, Jackie. This is Alex. Nice to be with all of you tonight as well. Thanks for the opportunity to help present this. So actually, because of a lot of the work that PTA has been doing, as well as some of the other groups they partner with, there's actually been a lot going on regarding this issue in the past couple of months. So first, let's talk about where we were with actions that the Department of Agriculture, namely Secretary Perdue, has taken regarding school meal programs. So recently, the USDA extended 3 waivers that were initially granted in the spring. These waivers were initially set to expire on June 30th, and the extension is until August 31st. And these following waivers will remain in effect for several programs. What these flexibilities allow for is For meals that do not meet normal meal patterns when necessary to keep kids fed, so in other words, different times and things like that. Meals to be served outside of group settings and outside, I'm having trouble with that word, outside of standard times to facilitate grab and go and other alternative service options. And then lastly, parent guardian pickup. So when a student themselves can't come physically to pick up a meal, parents and guardians can pick them up instead. You can think about situations where kids themselves don't have access to cars or vehicles and things like that, and there's a central meal site to pick things up on. So there has been flexibility to try to deal with a lot of the issues that, excuse me, that have been we've been confronted with since COVID-19 hit us. If we could go to the next slide, please. So USDA has also added a new waiver to this list. Schools can pause the quote unquote offer versus serve rule that allows high school students to take some or leave some food as offered as part of a meal. You know, the rule was originally designed to cut back on food waste, but it's very difficult to deal with when you're talking about prepackaged food. Obviously, you can imagine, hey, here's the package of food and how does that work in real time? And then USDA has also extended the deadline from June 30th to August 31st for schools to apply for community eligibility for the 2020-2021 school year. This is an important authority, important authority I'm sure many of you are aware of, that allows schools to more efficiently provide school meals by not having to deal with the administrative burdens in the same way if they were doing individual free and reduced price lunch applications. The exciting thing about this is that the agency, USDA here, is also allowing schools to use the student poverty data through the end of June, which means they'll be more likely to capture the impact of the pandemic on family finances. Obviously, if you're looking at poverty data from last November, it's really different from a situation that captures the spring kind of situation here. If we can move to the next slide, please. So, you know, the current state of play here also continues with, I probably don't need to tell all of you this, but the effects of COVID-19 on school meal programs has been pretty significant. You've had issues around reimbursement rates. You've had issues requiring students to prove their low income status for meals. It's been really complicated. You know, we see a lot of advocates using this moment to call for policy fixes that would help districts feed children through the crisis, and short-term waiver extensions to long-term, rallying around universal school meals. There are a lot of ideas out there, and PTA has been at the forefront of trying to push a lot of these ideas to ensure that kids remain fed during this crisis, but also that our child nutrition programs continue to operate well for kids out there. It's been part of it, PTA's long history in trying to drive some of this stuff. And I did mention how some of the initial packages that Congress has put out there in terms of COVID-related issues have provided additional flexibility in funds. In fact, the Families First package, which was the package provided by Congress before the much more popular and probably that you're familiar with CARES Act package, actually provided $8 billion, over $8 billion for child nutrition programs to deal with the sort of issues we're talking about around reimbursement rates, around challenges states and school districts and meal providers were having to get meals in place. To address a lot of the larger challenges, we're looking at here, advocates have called on USDA to allow emergency feeding programs to continue throughout the 2020-2021 school year. Congress has also gotten in the act here. House Democrats have included a provision in the HEROES Act. That's the latest COVID relief package that the House has passed just in the past few weeks, that would reimburse school food authorities for a portion of the operational costs of providing emergency meals during the pandemic. Senate's yet to take this up. We're going to talk about, I think, a little bit about the timing of the next COVID package as this webinar continues on. But obviously, I think there's a big interest here in trying to make sure that folks have the administrative authority and the resources to do this. And actually, in no small part to the advocacy of PTA, Jackie mentioned PTA's priority around essentially ensuring that school meal kitchens have the latest equipment and have the wherewithal to be able to produce meals and nutritious meals in a safe and timely way. House Democrats, just in the appropriations bill that was released, gosh, just a couple of days ago, included $35 million for school meal kitchen equipment grants. The National PTA has been advocating for such grants, as Jackie mentioned, to modernize and ensure the safety of school meal cooking facilities. Well, Congress is listening on that. Now, that's just the House proposal. We have a Senate bill to get through and eventually a deal to make probably by the end of this year on these sort of proposals. But I think it's definitely a sign that members of Congress are realizing we have issues out there and the PTA is having an impact on these sort of things. I think, Jackie, I'm supposed to turn it back to you to talk about our next slide.
Yes, thank you, Alex. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a few ways that you can advocate at the state and local level, and then also talk in the next slide about an action that you can take today regarding some federal activity or federal advocacy that you can do on behalf of child nutrition. One important thing at the local level and school-based level is that we really encourage you to work with the school nutrition services team at the school or in the district level to make sure that their needs are being met, so that they're really not hindered in their efforts to prepare and serve nutritious and appetizing meals, as well as helping them to maybe generate some more excitement around the school meal program. And I'm going to ask Stephanie to step in here in a little bit to tell about some of the great work that she's done as some examples of that. At the state level, it's really important that you are engaging with not only your state legislatures, but also the Board of Education, the Child Nutrition Agency at the state level, as well as the governor, to encourage them to make sure that child nutrition standards are strong and that all students have access to healthy school meals. And so getting involved in knowing what's happening at the state level regarding child nutrition programs and school meals is really important as well, and making your voice heard through social media, as well as engaging in coalitions and or obviously letters, other communications to those state leaders. Another thing to make sure that you're doing is understanding what the standards are, and also what's going on in your school district, and understanding what kind of meals are being served, and advocating for healthy, nutritious meals. And then highlighting successes. There are a lot of great examples of really great school meal programs and partnerships among PTAs and families and students in the school around school meals and school gardens and family meal nights and recipe challenges. And so I think it's really important that you're sharing those stories, because that's a form of advocacy as well, to demonstrate that this is something parents and families and students want, and they're excited about, and they want to engage in these conversations on nutrition. And then lastly, making sure that you're helping to push out information on community eligibility, as well as expansion of child nutrition programs and increasing the access to existing programs as well. I'd love, Stephanie, if you wanted to share a little bit about your experience in working with local PTAs and helping them get excited and engaged on school meal and child nutrition programs and activities.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. So a lot of this work you're hearing about is at the federal level, but it's really all happening at the local level, right? So these meals are being served at every single one of your schools in your district. And a lot of the decisions made about what meals are to be served and how they're going to be served are at your district level. So it's a really great opportunity to connect with your school nutrition director in your district to learn, one, how can PTAs help? And two, what are the opportunities for your district there? One of those that's really big, a lot of people are starting to learn more about the community eligibility provision. And this is something that we worked on really heavily in Durham as part of a PTA project that was completely separate from CEP, but it came up about how can we better serve all of the children in our district, and that was through making sure as many children were eating meals at no cost to them. and that can be done through CEP. So if you're thinking about how you can get involved, the biggest recommendation I have to you is just reach out to your school nutrition director and say, hey, I'm with the PTA. We want to know how we can help. How can we help connect more families and more children with meals? How can we make sure that we are serving all of the children that we need to? So that's really the first step, is reaching out and seeing how you can support them and what are the advocacy opportunities, because a lot of times the school nutrition directors will go to their local school boards or their superintendents and say, hey, we want to expand CEP, we want to do more with summer feeding, and they don't get very far, unfortunately. And so PTAs can be a huge advocate to push those issues and to really make sure that those programs are happening and be a support for your school nutrition programs at your local district level. So I'll turn it back over to you, Jackie.
Sorry about that. Took me a second to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Really appreciate you giving some more detail and examples to some of the important work that can be done at the state and district level regarding child nutrition. Next slide, please. I'd love to share an opportunity with you to take action today at the federal level. As you know, there's been a tremendous amount of conversation regarding the reopening of schools this fall, the physical reopening of schools, right? Schools will start this fall in some form or fashion, but we know that in order for schools to reopen as safely as possible, there's going to be many resources that are going to be needed. And one of those resources that we certainly are focused on is additional funding for food and nutrition services at USDA to continue to prevent, prepare, and respond to food insecurities, and also help schools adapt to the new food service and meal protocols as students will go. As students will physically go back to school. We are also asking in our action alert for additional federal funding to school districts to help them safely reopen. We know there's going to be a lot of increased needs from cleaning to school personnel, such as school nurses, etc., PPE, all these things that are going to cleaning, etc., that are going to be needed to help make sure that schools and transportation, since there's social distancing, etc. We're also asking for $4 billion for remote learning and connectivity. We know that online learning is going to continue in some form or fashion, and as always, a lot of schools have conducted a lot of learning through digital devices and technology, and that is going to continue to occur. And we expect that there may be potential, there's going to be some hybrid models that have already been proposed and potentially continue, several months into the school year potentially. And so we want to make sure that all students have access to the devices and the broadband needed to engage in remote learning. COVID-19 has certainly shown a bright spotlight on a lot of inequities throughout our society and throughout our nation, and the homework gap, which is one of them, that not every student has access to the device and or the broadband to be able to engage in their learning, even pre-COVID, and certainly once COVID, there was a need to close schools last spring. We're also asking for emergency funding for family engagement, knowing that families have always had a critical and essential role in their child's education, but even more so now as parents are really truly not only their child's first teacher, but are being their teacher almost every single day this last spring. And so as I said, we expect that there'll continue to be some areas that will continue with some online learning in some form or fashion, and we want to make sure that parents and families have the resources they need to support their child and their child's learning. We're also asking for additional funding for Title I, and as well as IDA for students with disabilities, knowing that these student populations are going to have continued and increased needs as we re-enter school in this coming fall. So with that, I'll stop there, and hopefully you all received this action alert because you're signed up for our Takes Action Network. But if you're not, I encourage you to go to www.pta.org/takeaction, which is probably what I should have put on that slide instead of the direct link. But that's where you can take action today on that action alert. And what to expect from Congress in the next few weeks. As Alex mentioned, there's a lot of conversation right now about a fourth COVID relief package, and we do expect Congress to take action. The timing, of course, is up in the air, but we do anticipate that Congress will come together and will and draft and ultimately pass a fourth COVID package, which is why your advocacy and your reaching out through this action alert to your members of Congress is so critical at this time, to make sure they know that parents and families really are pushing for those critical needs so that schools can provide the resources and support they need to students as the fall, as the school year begins. Alex, do you want to add anything to that before we turn it over for some questions?
Yeah, I think just to reiterate there, kind of your timing on that. I mean, I think members of Congress realize that with everything going on and spikes in some states regarding more COVID cases, there's a real need to come up with that fourth package that Jackie was talking about. And there's no way with everything that's going on that it doesn't include a lot of the priorities that Jackie has mentioned in terms of what PTA is advocating for. I think members of Congress get that schools and parents are integral parts of this. We'll just have to see kind of how it materializes. And Jackie's certainly going to be engaging a lot of the folks on the Hill to make sure that it does what we need it to do to help all of you and the folks that you work with.
All right, next slide. I know we're running short on time, and I want to make sure that if there's any questions, we can get to that and allow Dana and Stephanie to close out. So I know Dana shared with me that she'll be able, and Stephanie, that they can share all these links to you in a follow-up email. So instead of me wasting any more time on this, because I know if you have any questions, I want to make sure we get to those, but we'll make sure you get these resources on child nutrition, our issue brief that you can use in your advocacy efforts, and then access to a lot of our healthy lifestyles pages and smart snacks and meals guides for you to take a look at. So with that, I guess we should go to questions. Dana and Stephanie, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it takes a second to unmute yourself, so sorry about that, everyone. So I am looking at the questions box. You all, if anyone has questions, please send them along. I don't see any questions right now, so I will open it up to say if anyone wants to speak to any advocacy work that they're doing in their respective communities, please share that out so that others can see what you're doing, and that might provide an example for other PTAs to take on the same actions and activities in their communities. So feel free to share out. And yeah, I think maybe, Stephanie, we can go to the next slide just to give folks a chance to respond and provide any feedback or questions that they have in the questions box. Thank you. So thanks everyone for joining the webinar. These are the announcements and the reminders that I have for everyone. So I have been mentioning to everyone that we do have TikTok grant funding available for PTAs. This is National PTA working with TikTok to provide emergency relief grants to help our PTAs during the COVID-19 pandemic that we're currently experiencing. So the grant application closes on July 12th. We have the website there that you can visit to get information about the grant. I also wanted to mention that enrollment for the School of Excellence program is open, and you can visit pta.org/excellence to get more information. As I mentioned, and as Jackie said, you will be getting a follow-up email that has the links to the information that was provided during the webinar. We'll also send you information about the grant opportunities that I just mentioned, along with the webinar recording and the satisfaction survey. If there are any questions in the questions box that were asked, we will address those questions in the thank you follow-up email that you'll receive. So with that, I want to thank everyone for, again, joining us. We really appreciate you hanging in there for this webinar series of this very important subject matter. I did notice that we did have some regular attendees that attended all of our webinars. So again, just thank you for the time that you devoted to this important topic. And thanks so much, everyone. And you all have a great evening and be safe.